important. All right. So just to complete what I was saying, Alex is going to show you guys some camera tricks, some shading. What are these tools up here? Some basic rendering that may be useful for your first submission. We're going to cover the actual rendering the week after. So Branko and Matt are going to give you guys a lecture, and then we'll do the tutorial on it. But just to complete, I'm going to go back to some of the mesh stuff that we talked about. So one thing was, actually I'm going to go back to this guy. Move it back here, so delete this. We don't like it anymore, so just delete this back here. Ooh, that's fine. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, that was good. Thanks for the support. I'm gonna delete the history. Okay, right there. So if I want to clean my mesh, as I showed you guys, so when I have the object selected, I'll go under mesh, and then down here I've got a cleanup tool. It will give me a window. I don't know, did it work for you or no at the end? It's still thinking. Okay, so there are some options you can check when you want to do a cleanup. So first, don't check anything, just clean up and see if it does anything for you. Second time, check everything under here. And then do the cleanup and see if it works for you. If it doesn't, check everything and then see if it works for you. Because it's maybe a time-consuming process, sometimes it makes sense just to say, okay, my scan was not perfect, let me go back to recap because it has access to my original file. It may be a bit cleaner. So edit your geometry a little bit there and clean it up, reduce the faces, and then bring it back to Maya and just start manipulating without reducing the meshes, the polys. Because sometimes it is doing some weird stuff that you can't really find an easy way to fix because it was a machine producing a 3D object for you. It's not a very clean mesh. There are some tools like the mesh cleanup and the reduce polys and the recap to address those issues, but sometimes it may not work. The other thing that I wanted to show that actually Alex was mentioning and is very useful, he will go to more details, but I'm going to show you that just because I started to talk about it. So remember I did this shell thing around the object, and because I wanted to, if it's still there, I'm not sure if it's there, but I'm just going to do it again, select all the faces, and do an extrude. So shift right click, extrude. Oops, you see it's not very clean. Probably I have already done it once. Anyways, what I wanted to show, ooh, what happened? There. What I wanted to show is that instead of deleting a part and see through your object, you could also do that through your camera. So if you have your camera selected, and again, Alex is going to show you guys more details, but just specifically to this situation, you have the near clipping and a far clipping. That means there's a range to what you can see and what you can't. So right now, if I have my object selected as my center by pressing F, I've got my camera. I'm just selecting my near clipping, and I'm trying to, if it works, I'll give it a different number, like 100. That's too much. Maybe 10. And you can see it's 1. I should make it like 4. Okay, now you can see if it's actually 15, it's too much. If it's 10, okay, now you can see as I get close to my object, it's clean, it's deleting. So some parts at the front I can't see, but instead I can see the inside of my geometry. So that's the 10 distance from my camera point to the object, it's cutting off. Same thing with the far clipping. If it's 12, I will just see the 2 units distance between the far and near clipping numbers that I've defined. So I'll just put it back to 0.1, and this one should be a pretty big number, so 100,000 or something. And then the last thing before I hand it over to Alex is that the units in Maya, they are usually not defined. So you are using units. You're not using meters or inches or anything. You're just using Maya units. And then later on, you can define what they are, but don't worry too much about the actual units, but think about the relationships between these units. That's my part. So Alex, if you want to jump in.
All right, guys, we're on our final lap, so I'll be as clear as I can be when it comes to the next step, which is really trying to do some wire renderings, which you guys will have to produce, I think, for your next submission. First, one of the things that we haven't really gone through yet are some of these tabs here, as well as the icons underneath. So the first one that's kind of interesting is the shading. So if you can toggle through these guys here, and basically you can select just the wireframe view, the smooth side shade all, as well as the flat shade all, to really just interact with your object in different ways, which might help you figure out, okay, if there are abnormalities, where are they? But usually I find that the smooth side shade all is quite useful in seeing all of the geometry that you're manipulating. You'll see that down here there are small icons that also do the same thing, as well as a textured and wireframed on shaded option as well. So I'll take these guys off. Another interesting one is this one here, which is the under the lighting tab. You can see two-sided lighting, which if you, it's really useful if you are in a situation similar to what Mattiar had before, where if you select a face, and he has the it allows you to kind of see a shaded view of the inside, whereas I believe if before just the use all lights, it's sorry, I'll take that off in default lighting. The two-sided lighting usually what it does is it highlights everything inside, whereas before when you were kind of manipulating the geometry, it's quite dark and hard to move around in. So if you go into the lighting and play around, you can kind of just see the different settings and the different options that you have to view the object. And as Mattiar touched upon before, if you click on the camera tab, you will be able to play around with the focal length, as well as the camera scale and the clipping plane on the attributes editor. And there are quite a few settings that are available here. I'm just going to make sure that I'm, yes, recording. So it is always useful to kind of go through these tabs and see like which viewports are being utilized at this point, as well as some of the options in the panels that you can bring up and manipulate. Because a lot of the things that you'll end up going through the hotkeys are actually just located with the icons here, so it's pretty good to get familiar with those. So we're going to go into the wireframe renderings, and so we'll just kind of we'll pick a view, and the hotkey B, there's also another use for it. So if you tap Alt B, you can change the background of your viewport. And for the case of this wireframe, we'll select black. And if you select your object and you right-click, you will see Assign New Material. And for the sake of the wireframe, the most useful one would be the surface shader. So if you go down to bring that back for a second. So if you go down to Assign New Material, and you go down to Surface on the left tab, surface shader basically creates a black surface all over your object, which helps it blend into its surrounding environment. Now, for some of you, when you hit that, you'll see that your wireframe doesn't show up. And so what you'll do is, if you go under shading, you'll see wireframe on shaded, and you just have to make sure that that's selected in order for your wireframe to turn up. Also, if you want your wireframe to be a different color, you would go under the display tab, and you'll see the option to change the color there. And if you go into the wireframe color, you can change it to RGB, and then basically change it to any color you want. So we'll make it white for the sake of this render. And so we'll go into the render tab here, and if you go into the settings itself, you have to go under anti-aliasing, sorry. And what I found is in order to export a high quality rendering, it's worthwhile to bring the multi-sampling anti-aliasing sample count to its highest degree. And so this image is now ready to be exported as a PNG. And so we'll finally get down to the timeline here that's typically used for animations. And so the 1 to 120 is really the frame count that exists if you are doing an animation. You can export a series of frames which then make up the motion. But for the sake of our use of it, we're only going to be using one frame. So we'll change that the settings that you have currently from what it was before to 1 and 1. And then we'll go into Play Blast. So you go up to the timeline here, and you right click, and you go into the Play Blast options. And so I will reset the settings so that I have the same thing that you guys have. We don't need the view or show ornaments, so you uncheck those. What we do need, though, is the format to be set into image. And then you'll notice in the encoding that you'll now have a drop-down menu that gives you a series of output options. And so you'll select PNG. So is everyone following? Sorry, did you have a question? Or? Okay. And we'll go down to scale. So it's at 50%, but we'll just make it 1. We want it to be at the scale that we see here. And move temporary files, save to file, that's fine. And then you can save where you want this to be. So we'll just say test wireframe. And we'll just make sure that that guy's under PNG. And then we apply. And so now, if we go into the if we go onto our desktop where I've saved it, you'll see that there is the test wireframe, which will give you the output of your of the wireframe version of your model, which you can then take into Photoshop and get rid of the negative space if you want a different background, or whatever you want to do in order to create that axo grid for your submission. And so that's the basic rundown of the wireframe rendering. If you guys have any other questions, please let me know, and I'll be happy to take you through it again. And Shay, did you?
Yeah, the camera. Do you want to show?
Okay.
Are you recording?
Yes.
Should I stop it and start a new one?
No, you're fine.
Okay. So I guess you guys understand what a 1 point and a 2 point perspective means. Is there anyone who doesn't? Don't be shy. Anyways. Okay, if it makes you feel any better, I had to remind myself. But basically, when you have a one-point perspective, it means you have one point in your camera and all of your lines and all of the edges of your object converges towards that point. And when you have a two-point perspective, it means you have 2 points along an horizon where all of the edges of your object in your view converges towards. And because Maya is pretty much heavy on animation and like realistic camera simulations, it doesn't have, or at least I've not found a specific way, like say a button to click and convert your view into a 2-point perspective or a 1-point perspective. However, there is a workaround that. So um, first of all, we're gonna create a camera that has a target and the camera so that we can manipulate the camera to give us a 1-point or 2-point perspective. And so to do that, you can just go to create, go to cameras, and you can create a camera. And with the little box beside the create camera, you can sort of set the specific properties of your camera. But we're going to come back to that. So let's go back to create. Sorry, create cameras. Let's just create a camera. Now, if you use just the create and the camera, it gives you just the camera alone. But because we want to manipulate the look of the perspective, we want to use both the camera and the target of the camera. So I'm going to delete that. And if you go back to create cameras, underneath that option, that menu, you would see create a camera, and the aim, and create a camera, aim, and up. And so we're going to use the create camera and aim. The aim is the target of the camera. So that would be your camera target. This would be your camera. And if you, let's just pull this camera back a bit. And let's pull that forward a bit. So if you remember what I said about a 1-point perspective, it's when all of your edges convert towards 1 point. So if I'm going to duplicate this object. Okay. So now if we had 2 objects side by side and we wanted them to converge towards this point, if I went to this camera view, and to do that, you would just go to panels, go to perspective, and you'd see the camera that you've created. And so that's camera 1. I'm just going to go there.
Shay, if you select the one that's missing, you go under shading. There's a wireframe on shaded, so if you go down a little bit, up there.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, Alt B.
Okay, thank you. Oh, still doesn't work well, but.
That's the wireframe.
Oh, because
Yeah.
you need to click the wireframe icon as well.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. So so this is close to what a 1-point perspective would be, but it doesn't exactly look like a perspective. And if you did that, just move your camera a little bit, you might begin to see what looks like a 1-point perspective, but this still looks like a normal perspective. And so we're going to like just adjust the camera a little bit. So let's go to our top view and let's mess around with the camera. So I'm going to move that back here. I'm going to go to my front view. Actually, the side view. And I'm going to move that down so that it's on the same plane. And so now that so remember my camera is selected on the top view, and if I go to my perspective and I come to the attribute editor, I can go to my camera editor. Actually, no, let's go to the channel box / layer editor. And under the channel box / layer editor, when your camera is selected, you can translate the camera, and you can play around with these camera settings here. So it gives you the option of adjusting the film aperture, the vertical film aperture, and the focal length, and a bunch of other things. But we're going to play around with these first three. So, so first of all, let's start by adjusting the focal length. So like the way you would operate a real camera with your, like your lens having a particular range of focal numbers, like that's the same way this works. So if we reduce that to say 10, it would give you what in real life would be sort of like a wide angle, and that makes it look more like a 1 point perspective, because then you have, because what the wide angle does is it increases the extent of your camera view, and it makes the edges sort of pull out more and converge towards 1 point. So that way, and as long as your point, your aim is in the center of your camera, that sort of gives you a 1 point perspective view. Excuse me. You can also mess around with the horizontal and vertical film aperture. Let's increase that to 5. It just pushes it out more. Increase that to 3, pushes it out more. Now it starts to look distorted and weird, so you probably want to stay within the range of 0.9, and this was or even 1, somewhere around there. Anyways, I'll leave that to you guys to mess around with it, see what looks good, what works. Sorry?
I just have one more thing to add.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna go over the 2 point and then.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So similarly to the way the 1 point perspective works, you can also mess around with a 2 point perspective. And for you to achieve a 2 point perspective, the most important thing is that you have your target placed here. So you have your target placed somewhere along the corner edge of your object. So let's select that and bring that here. So if I go to the top view, I want to do something like this, because when I'm looking at a 2 point perspective, here let's just pull up. Facebook, read my messages. Okay, so good. So this is what a 2 point perspective would look like, and a 1 point perspective, and this is what a 1 point perspective would look like. So again, everything converges to 1 point in the 1 point perspective. So now in the 2 point perspective, you have this first vanishing point and the second vanishing point, and you always have the edge of your object in the middle. So as opposed to the 1 point perspective where you have the vanishing point in the middle, in the 2 point perspective you always have an edge of your object in the middle. So you want to make sure that you have that edge in Maya. So yeah, so I'm just gonna put the target at the first edge, put the camera at the second edge, and let's go back to perspective. Now this object is somewhat distorted, it's weird. Sorry? Okay, let's invert it, or let's just use a box. My dear, like you said, a box is the best example. Polygons, box. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to the top view. Good. So now if we why can't I select my camera target? Okay, for some reason it's missing. I'm just gonna make a new camera. Okay, let's put the target here and let's put the camera there. And so if we select our camera and go to perspective, perspective, and let's go to camera 2, and I'm just going to dolly out. Delete that. Okay, so now in the 2-point perspective, you can again let's adjust the camera, select camera. I hope I'm not going too fast. Does anyone have a question so far? Okay, so let's adjust that, make that like 10. Actually, let's make it like 20. Okay, and I think the beautiful thing about the 2-point perspective is you can just place your target there and sort of move your camera, like dolly your camera around. So as long as you have your target behind the edge that is in the center of your camera view, it sort of gives you a 2-point perspective. Again, you can just like play around with trying to adjust that to make it fit your needs. Yeah, Maria, you can.
Okay. So it's always good to set your cameras so you can fix them and then go back to them. There's just one more tool in Maya I want to show you that's pretty useful. And then just going to explain to you quickly, I don't know how important it is, but just quickly show you on the board. I know Branko explained, but what the different camera settings would, how they would affect your 1, 2, or 3-point perspectives. So what I wanted to show in Maya is these tools over here, and I thought about that because, so remember when I had the box in the middle and she created the camera, he had to move the box away to see the camera in the center. To make that easier, there are some tools over here. So the first one is just it's your view. The second one is your 4-window view, and then the third one actually is a side-by-side view, and then the last one you can see this pop-up thing where you can select whatever is in your scene. So that may be something you want to use a lot of the times. So if the last thing is on over there, through this list, you can select everything that is in your scene. So and each object has a name. So the mesh, even your cameras are showing up. The camera group is there because there's a camera and a target point. So those are coming in the group. And I think that's the last piece.